He brings up a good point. I mean, you have to look at the effects since the surge began, and you could definitely spin that there is positive developments in Iraq, at least since the surge began.
Well, it depends how you look at it. You know, our soldiers are still facing death every day. They're getting hit by these IEDs. It's not about being a good soldier when you're riding down a road and your car blows up. That's just the enemy striking when it wills. And I don't think that's a war exactly. It's an occupying situation. It's a horrible situation. Our soldiers have to go into firefights, but so often these deaths are caused by these IEDs, these improvised explosive devices along highways where somebody's got a garage door opener and pulls a button. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And it seems to me that still the question comes back, if we're winning, we ought to be able to come home. The definition of victory is Americans get to come home. It's not that you get to stay longer. The way they've misconstrued this war from the beginning, the terminology they used, you know, regime change, not invasion. You know, these terms are clever. Preemptive war, not war. Well, it is a war. It's not a preemption. It's a war. And it is an invasion and an occupying force by our people. It's not a regime change. It's not some neat taking out of some bad guy. The language has been scary, and the use of the word surge, by the way, surge by any common use means like a surge of electricity. It stops. A surge ends. An escalation is when you increase your troop forces in the field. This is an escalation. So the language is the first problem. And this administration has used language to justify a policy, and very effectively so, to the point where journalists use the new language to justify a policy which wouldn't have been able to be sold under the old language. And Pat and I agree on this. Yeah. The old language is pretty good. Aggression, non-aggression. These are good words. They mean you trust the sovereignty, even of a despicable government, rather than your own right to invade that country. Yeah. You can't get into the new lingo without falling into this trap of a new attitude about war and sovereignty and American role in the world. Why do we have this new role of changing regimes? Because there's new language? I think it is a bit scary, and unfortunately the media has bought into it. Pat, you know I'm right on this.
No, words matter,
Chris,
Pat.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Clearly, though, the Democratic Party is paralyzed by the fear. They were accused. You lost China. You all lost Vietnam by cutting off its aid. This paralysis, I think, this fear of what went before is why the Democrats have not cut off aid or imposed a timetable. Let me ask you, if the United States, you get Barack Obama as president, and we do pull out in 16 months, and this thing collapses and it's a strategic horror and a humanitarian disaster, because we can get out of America out of the war, but that doesn't necessarily mean the war there is going to end. And you got a Shia-Sunni war going on with the Iranians helping the Shia. I mean,
sure.
What does that do to American politics if that's the consequence of what Republicans would say was a precipitate withdrawal?
Let's talk about our situation in the world. If you were a bad guy over there, from our perspective, if you were Al-Qaeda, a real brainiac over there, what would you rather have, the United States in Iraq or out of Iraq, Pat?
Well, I mean, I agree with you. I think Al-Qaeda will be wiped out by the Sunnis, but I think there could be a Sunni-Shia war.
I never forget my favorite movie, Lawrence of Arabia. The Turks, rather the Arabs wanted the Turks to stay in Arabia so they could keep blowing up their trains and make them the enemy. They wanted them to rebuild. They want us to constantly rebuild and reinforce and surge, because they continually use us as the poster boy for everything that's wrong with the West. It looks to the Arabs like we're invading. That's what they want it to look like. If we retreat, sure, we're in retreat, but I think there are other ways to end this war than simple retreat. I think there are ways to end it if we had a great leader, perhaps. I'm not sure we have one on the horizon. Maybe it is McCain. To find a way. Maybe we should elect a Republican in order to get us out of the war, because irony seems to be a better bet than what we've gotten, because this administration promised humility in foreign policy, and we've gotten the opposite. We've gotten so. Okay. That's our policy right now.
You know what, I think we're going to be hearing from John McCain a little bit more about his foreign policy message coming up later this week. And Chris Matthews, Pat Buchanan, stay with us.